Benjamin Rush, known as the father of psychiatry, was very concerned with the treatment of mentally ill. He believed in a better world for humankind and was set to change the treatment of mad people in a more humane and moral fashion. The previous methods for treating the mentally ill often involved chaining them down and keeping them in small, dark, and cold spaces. Patients were often beaten, whipped, and malnourished. Instead of focusing on rehabilitation and treatment, mentally ill patients were treated as monsters and were locked away from society so as to be forgotten. Rush believed that mental illness was not due to the possession of evil or witchcraft, which had been a popular belief, but that the mentally ill were actually sick and could often be cured. Benjamin Rush believed that the total personality and emotions of a person influenced mental stability. Some of the treatments he employed are very similar to what we use today, such as exercise, hydrotherapy, occupational therapy, and art therapy. Rush insisted that keeping patients busy and active would benefit their mental state and promoted activities such as reading, gardening, art, any kind of productive work to occupy the mind. Rush paid close attention to the surroundings of his patients. He believed in providing a more comfortable and inviting environment, which included plants, windows to allow in plenty of light, and even emphasized the importance of healthy diet to improve the mental stability of the patients. The physical state of each patient was also of great importance. Rush wanted his patients to practice good hygiene, wear clean and fitting clothing, to look respectable in hopes of giving them some sort of self-worth. Additionally, Rush found through his years of observation and practice that talking with the patients and having them write down their thoughts and feelings was helpful and provided unique insights for the patients about themselves. He encouraged intelligent conversations with patients. Getting them involved and providing a sense of connection could keep their minds sharp and would help in their recovery. He believed that the patient needed to trust his physician, and only through respect and honesty could this relationship be achieved in order to successfully treat the patient. Benjamin Rush was devoted to his work as well as to his patient. He believed in the good of people and sought to clarify the great misunderstanding of mental illness and those who suffered from it. He took great strides in developing more humane treatment for the mentally ill, which serves as the foundation for psychiatric treatment today.
According to Freud in his novel The Interpretation of Dreams, it is the fate of all of us, perhaps, to direct our first sexual impulse towards our mother, and our first hatred and our first murderous wish against our father. This bold statement reflects how Freud viewed sexuality and why he developed the Oedipus and Electra complexes. According to Freud's theory of psychosexual development, following the phallic phase, the boy enters the Oedipus phase as he fantasizes of carrying out sexual activity with his mother. Consequently, the original identification with the father transforms to one of rivalry. At this point, the boy sees the female genitals and proposes that she must have been castrated. The child then fears that if he arouses enough anger from his father, the father will castrate him as well. Freud termed castration anxiety, which ultimately causes the son to retreat from his desire for his mother. The boy does eventually overcome the castration complex with the overcoming of the Oedipus complex. The boy represses his desire to replace his father out of fear and also represses his sexual desires towards his mother. The resolution of conflict ends the Oedipus complex. Although Freud spent most of his time on the Oedipus complex in young boys, he also felt that the idea was universal and applied to girls in a slightly different manner. The phenomenon postulated by Freud is named after the Greek myth of Electra, daughter of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra, who planned the murder of her mother after she slept around on her father. Freud explains that just as the young boy discovers the female genitals, the young girl discovers the male penis. She blames her castration on her mother and quickly develops Freud's perception of penis envy. This idea is similar to the boy's Oedipus complex with some slight variations. The castration complex, for example, initiates the Electra complex rather than ending it. Additionally, rather than desiring her mother, the young girl desires her father sexually and envies her mother. Lastly, since there is no equivalent threat of castration to the young girl, as she is already castrated, the complex is not abandoned suddenly like in the Oedipus complex. Rather, the complex is eventually weakened over time through maturation.
Dream analysis and symbolism is one of the largest strands woven into the unconscious in psychoanalysis. In the beginning of Sigmund Freud's practice and development of his own psychological model, dream analysis and psychoanalysis were almost interchangeable aspects of one another. One of Sigmund Freud's largest contributions to psychoanalysis, as well as one of his most famous works, is The Interpretation of Dreams, first published in 1899. In his book, Freud makes a clear distinction between the manifest dreams, which are at the surface level of the consciousness, and more unconscious dreams called latent dreams. The interpretation of dreams was Freud's early attempt to theorize about the unconscious and topographical levels of dreams that he eventually termed as psychoanalysis. The interpretation of dreams also contains a collection of analyses of dreams and how they relate to subgroups of the unconscious. The unconscious is further categorized in the interpretation of dreams into three main parts: the id, ego, and superego. The id is the part of one's consciousness that contains primal impulses, desires, and unrestrained wishes. The ego is part of one's mind concerned with the reflection of oneself as well as self-awareness. The superego is an individual's moral checkpoint, the region of the brain that suppresses inappropriate input from the id. Through the process of dreaming, Freud believed that the superego no longer imposes itself over the id, and therefore one's primal desires are able to speak through dreams. Freud believed that the main purpose of psychoanalysis was to, quote, interpret and modify the unconsciousness. Dreams, in many ways, are the unconsciousness's attempt to bring wishes and desires to the surface of the conscious. Perhaps one of the largest contributions made by an individual to the theory of dream analysis was by Carl Jung. Jung believed that dreams originate in the unconscious, and that when there is an imbalance in unconscious and conscious minds, psychological neuroses develop. This imbalance causes a split in the human psyche. For example, the emotional and rational mind may be separated from one another. Jung believed that if an individual could interpret and understand what a dream, the unconscious, was trying to tell them, they would be able to overcome their fragmentation of their conscious state. Today, much of the current views on dreams and their importance in the psychoanalytic field have changed. One of the main issues and criticisms for dream analysis is the fact that it is not an easily studied subject. There is no method of testing for validity in dream interpretation. Other psychoanalytic themes, such as transference, have resulted in the lesson study of dream analysis. Although from a psychological perspective, the study of dreams is a practice of the past, psychoanalysis's contribution to the understanding of dreams and the unconsciousness has left an imprint in popular culture today.
Often contributed to Sigmund Freud, the idea of psychoanalysis was formally founded in 1895. While Freud did not have the original idea to consider consciousness, his efforts brought about the significance of the unconscious as a source of motivation. Freud theorized the repressed memory or thought sits in one's unconscious, manifesting itself into a characteristic symptom of hysteria or dissociation. He suggested repressed memories or complexes, which produce the characteristic dissociation in hysteria, are always the sexual wishes or fantasies of early childhood, and although repressed, still remain dynamic. Freud made several important contributions to the study of personality. He developed the fundamental idea that childhood is the foundation for personality guidance. Freud was determined to understand normal and abnormal behavior. He developed treatments for the mentally disturbed and explained many behaviors and thought processes in terms of the unconscious and repressed desires. Perhaps one of Freud's biggest contributions to the field of psychoanalysis was his daughter, Anna Freud. Anna sought to understand psychoanalysis through a developmental perspective. While she expanded on her father's ideas of psychoanalysis, as an elementary school teacher, she focused her observations on young children. Certain concepts developed by Sigmund Freud, such as unconscious motivation,
The importance of childhood experiences on influencing adult behavior, defense mechanisms, and a general interest in the unconscious have had large contributions to psychology.